a better way. There must be a higher way, a higher way.
All right, so in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, the Bible tells us Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Very little is said about Enoch, but at the same time, my goodness grace, you're talking about a man who walked with God and then he was not. This is one of two men that did not see death. God took this man. This man walked with God. Now, just with that information alone, we should be interested in anything that this man have said or written or whatever. And we do have a book that was written by Enoch. Now, the reason I got into this book was because I wanted to understand Genesis chapter 6. In Genesis chapter 6, it's telling me that fallen angels have sex with women. And that out of that union came Nephilims. In verse 4 of Genesis chapter 6, it says, the Nephilims were on the earth in those days and afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. I mean, if you are a giant, if you're a celestial being, that means that you have powers. That means that you are of an intelligence that none of us can match, because again, you are part of celestial being. So they were extremely famous, extremely known, extremely feared by everybody else. And every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Nephilims were evil. Continuously evil. So sometimes we just read through these pages and we just move on. Never mind that we see giants in the Bible. We see the most famous giant in the Bible is Goliath. Goliath was a Nephilim. So we are trying to explain iniquity. We're trying to go deeper into this thing that we call iniquity. And we cannot talk about iniquity without understanding Genesis chapter 6. Now, this is part 3 of the work of Satan versus the redemptive work of Christ. We're talking about fighting sin, transgressions, and iniquity. And I'm going to do my best to try to explain this. But first, I want to let you know about this book. This is Dr. J. Winter. I recommend this book, and it's free. Okay, you might need to pay for the shipping, but the book himself is free. Dr. J. Winter understand the importance of this book, and he wanted to do his part in spreading this book. Now, this book is very controversial. The book of Enoch is. At one point, it was considered a part of Scripture. As a matter of fact, there are some denominations that actually consider this book, or books, because Enoch wrote more than one book, a part of Scripture. I don't know enough to conclude that this book should be a part of Scripture, but what I wanted to know was, did the book even exist? You know, because I know that after Christ, there was a lot of people that wrote all kinds of books, and they put the name of somebody famous, and I guess just like today, to sell it, you know, for the book to be famous. But these books were obviously not of God, because the theology was so messed up that they were obviously not of God. So I wonder to myself if the book of Enoch the same. But that is not the case with the book of Enoch. And the reason why I already concluded the book of Enoch does exist is because we have one of the original leaders in the church, Jude, who actually quoted out of the book of Enoch. In Jude Jude verse 14, he said, and Jude start this chapter by talking about all kinds of sins going on. He talks about fornication. He talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, he just talking about all kinds of sins that are happening. And in this context, he's talking about in verse 14, it was also about this man that Enoch, in the seventh generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, and to convict all of the ungodly of all their ungodly deeds, which they have done in an ungodly way, and all of the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Now, among the things that Jude is saying here in the context of what he's talking about, verse 8 kind of get my attention. He's talking about, yet in the same way, this man also by dreaming defile the flesh and reject authority and revile angelic majesties. Okay, so it kind of give you an implication of a little what happened in Genesis chapter 6. Okay, now let me just read a few portions here of the book of Enoch, but let me first start by some of the points that Dr. Winter made in his book. He said that not only that the book of Jude quoted Enoch, but also there's a letter that did not make it to the Bible. Okay, there were letters written that did not make it to the Bible. Maybe they were not necessary. Maybe already the Apostle Paul and Peter, they cover everything. But Barnabas, who was also one of the apostles, one of the leaders after Christ, Barnabas and Paul, they ministered together for a while. Barnabas also wrote some letters. And those letters, even though they are not considered part of the Bible, they are very important letters. Again, guys, we buy all kinds of books from all kinds of famous people. And we are blessed by those books, even though those books are not part of the Bible. What we're talking about that in those days, people were writing letters. People were writing books. That doesn't mean that they were a part of the Bible, but they have importance. And Barnabas was definitely a man of God. And here Dr. Winter is telling us that Barnabas quoted the book of Enoch 3 times. Okay? 3 times in his letters. And in 2 occasions, he called it scripture. Okay? He called that portion of the book of Enoch that he was quoting scripture. Dr. Winter also established that the original church, this book of Enoch was very popular among the original church folks and the Jewish alike. Okay? So now again, you can argue if this book is part of the Bible or not, but we cannot argue that the book actually exists, that the book was actually written by a man of God, a man who walked with God, a man that didn't know death, that God took with him. All right? Now, there's no way that I'm going to be able to read all these things to you, but let me just begin to introduce this book to you. In chapter 1, verse 1 here, the book of Enoch said, the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the days of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. Now, godless have to be removed. Enoch wrote about the last days. Okay? Enoch wrote about Jesus. And this was thousands and thousands of years before Christ. Perhaps the book of Enoch is the first book written by a human being. We know that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. We know that. Some people said that the book of Job was written even before Moses wrote the first 5 books. And obviously, Moses takes us all the way back to the beginning. God gave Moses that kind of revelation. But in reality, there is a possibility. Well, I mean, I should not say possibility. Logic tells you that if this book of Enoch was written by Enoch, it was written before Moses, because this book, Enoch, was 7 generations after Adam. Okay, so we're talking about over 3,000 years before James decided to quote Enoch. All right, so let me move on here. I mean, he even talked about the beast and everything. This is unbelievable. All right, now in chapter 3 of the book of Enoch, this is where things get pretty weird. And I say weird in a good way, because he started getting into Genesis chapter 6, but before Genesis was written. Keep that in mind. He says in chapter 3, starting in verse 1, and it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lust after them, and say to one another, come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Simatha, and this is one of the angels, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye might not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. See, this angel knew that what he was about to do was bad, very bad. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecation, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecation. Imprecation, man, that word is very hard. Upon it, and they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared, and the summit of Mount Hermon. And they call it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecation upon it. And then he goes on to mention the names, and these are very hard names to pronounce, the names of the leaders among these angels. See, he goes deeper into details. In verse 7 he said, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go into them and to defile themselves with them. Okay? They just took this woman. They didn't ask for her. They took them. Now, in verse 8, I want you guys to look at something here, because here we see how the devil uses these angels to teach us how to spread iniquity all over the place. You see? Like I said, in the garden, the devil introduced sin. The devil introduced transgression. The devil was able to fool Adam and Eve, or Eve first and then Adam. But here, he's teaching humanity how to spread iniquity. And look what happened here. In verse 8, and they taught them charms, enchantments, cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. Now, you read these things, and what is happening here is that this is the introduction of witchcraft. Okay? This is what is happening. witchcraft, ceremonial, demonic things. These fallen angels begin to teach that to us. And he says here, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. That's why they were so scared of these giants. They started actually eating men. If you remember when Moses sent out the 12 spies, and among the 12 spies was Caleb and Joshua to spy the land. And they came back, man, and 10 of those spies, they were so scared. They said, man, we look like grasshoppers out there. You know, these folks are humongous, you know. And they were scared. They said, there's no way we can conquer the land with these guys. And only Joshua and Caleb, who were godly men of faith, they knew that with God's help, they were going to be able to do it. But these 10 spies were not just scared. I mean, the children of Israel, they proved that they were great fighters. Even from the time of Abraham, they were great fighters. Something big scared them, and what scared them was these giants. So they were actually devouring men because they were so big. And, now, food was an issue. That's why a lot of the experts that actually get into this said that they actually begin to change animals and begin to mix animals and do all kinds of stuff. And that's the reason why the flood wiped up these animals, because they were also infected, to make the fruit bigger, to make the animals bigger, to make all kinds of stuff like that. Verse 10, and they begin to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusations against the lawless ones. That's why when the Bible tells us that the earth was filled with violence, and I have preached this before, we don't understand the nature of the violence that was really taking place back in those days. It says here, and Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields, breastplates, and make known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and ornaments and all kinds of stuff, and actually, to make weapons, war, to fight. That was not God's will. God wanted for us to be at peace. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all of their ways. That he's talking about the condition of people. Okay? So right here in that in that third chapter in the book of Enoch, he goes very deeply into what is taking place in Genesis chapter 6. Okay, you can find this on YouTube. You can find a lot of good videos, way better than this video that I'm making right now, with all kinds of illustration, all kinds of. I mean, there's some good stuff out there that can tell you, man, that these fallen angels were the ones used by Satan to really spread all kinds of iniquity around the earth. Now, when these Nephilims were killed, and they were killed in the flood, and we know that more Nephilims came after that, we know that. But those that were killed during the flood, all of those folks that were mixed and all that, the spirit of those things did not die. Those are the demons today. When you talk about demons today, you are talking about Nephilims that die. So fallen angels is one thing, okay? Fallen angels were those angels that follow Satan, okay? So we have 200 of those fallen angels that did this amazing sin. Out of that union came the Nephilims. Those were the giants. And when those giants were killed in the flood, out of that came demons, okay? And let me see if I can read something more here. I mean, you will have to get this book and you'll be able to read more. Because here we know that how they were thrown into the abyss, ABYSS, and we also see in Revelation how they are released. Okay, so again, we need to know what we are fighting against, guys. The magnitude of what is taking place here, we need to know this, and it's important that we read and that we understand this. This is not a game. This is not something small. This is a plan, a demonic plan that was developed a long time ago. So this was just an introduction. There's more to say about this topic. It's a very complicated topic. Again, I recommend that you get that book from Jay Winter. It's free, and that you look at videos talking about the book of Enoch, about the fallen angels and all that, so you can get an understanding of that. The next time we get together, we're going to talk about the third massive attack of the devil against humanity. And we're going to get into the Tower of Babel.